Alright, what's up everybody? So, I don't know about you all, but it actually feels pretty good getting not just one, but two games to talk about over on the channel this week. No, fake outrage, no fabricated headlines, nothing like that we have to resort to to get some actual content over here, but actual game releases. I'm glad about that, even if one of them clearly did not turn out the way some of us had hoped it to be. So, I've been playing both Forspoken and Dead Space over the past week. Now, I will say, both of them came in very late for me too. Therefore, I'm recording this video right now on the same day that it probably is going up on YouTube, which is Sunday. Because yeah, with Forspoken, we'd already heard in advance how a lot of people weren't getting any review codes until launch, right? Which was the same for me, that's what I was told. But the thing was that on Tuesday, when it was supposed to come out, I didn't even hear from them. So, at first I honestly had no intention of checking it out anymore once the reviews came in. It's definitely a bit of a sort of mindset shift, I guess that happened for me, where back in the days I always felt like no matter what scores a game is going to get, I have to check it out for myself because, hey, I have to form my own opinion about it, right? And while that's still, I think, a valid outlook, I also am much more, as I've told you all before, considerate with what I put my money towards. Are these games that I want to support? Because that's something I think about nowadays too, right? And when I saw everything that people had already been saying about Forspoken and you just watch a bunch of the reviews, you can basically exactly figure out what kind of game it is, going to be and what's, I guess, the main errors with it, the main issues, which in advance already had been a bit of a turn-off for me, I will say. So yeah, at first I thought I wasn't going to get it, but then on Thursday it still ended up coming in. I got a code from Square Enix out of nowhere, so I still have to thank them for that, I guess. But therefore, have still been able to check it out, but very late, like I said. Same goes for Dead Space, which I actually ended up buying myself on Friday. And I think that one didn't unlock until like 5 p.m. So both of them I've put about 4 hours into right now. These are by no means going to be reviews. I just wanted to kind of weigh in on the situation, on the discussion that's been very vivid, let's say, over on social media and all the reviews that have come out, of course, talking about it. So yeah, without further ado, that's exactly what we're going to do. So, where do we start off? Do we start off with the good or with the bad? I feel like most people will want me to get into the bad first, because that's always, what is most exciting, I guess. Yeah, Forspoken. Everything that people are saying about it seems to be true from what I can tell right now. If anything, this is the one thing that I will say, right? Before launch, I never had that much interest in the game. I did think that some of the gameplay footage they showed off looked appealing, like especially parkour moves, you always get me with that. The open world was looking just very vast, right? And it's this, especially the sort of speed that you can traverse it through, that yeah, I don't know, seeing that gameplay footage made me go, wow, I wish this game didn't have a protagonist and other characters that I absolutely seem to despise right now, because of course we'd already seen plenty of those cutscenes. Some of the footage where Frey, starts talking in a, I don't know, typical 2023 Twitter persona style personality, I guess. But I do have to say, what I definitely did not see coming is that now, having put a couple hours into the game, I definitely feel like Forspoken has bigger issues than just its protagonist alone. If anything, again, for the type of game that it is, which very much feels like a superhero experience. I mean, the gameplay in some ways is comparable to something like Infamous, where she's using nature as a sort of moveset, right? Throwing rocks at enemies, entangling them in these, like tree branches that just come out of the ground, I guess. She has some fire powers later on, I think, too, which I haven't unlocked myself yet. Yeah, and then it's those parkour abilities. I mean, think about how in Infamous you use Neon to just run your way up buildings and stuff. It's kind of comparable to that, but again, a game like this is supposed to be fast-paced, right? And it is, definitely, when it gets, and it comes to the combat. Maybe the one quick little disclaimer I do have to make also is that I feel like combat is the one redeeming element of this game. From what I'm seeing on social media, again, I'm not nearly as far into the game yet, so I still am limited to this one single moveset of just throwing a bunch of rocks and having 3 different attacks in that particular category, but apparently that gets pretty massively expanded on later on, and I've seen people pull off some pretty crazy combos. So, like, that's the one thing that I will give it. But at the same time, this is what I mean, where the game is supposed to be that fast-paced, and it feels like it when you're in those situations. I'm surprised how I think that in the first 2 or 3 hours of me playing the game, I played the game actually for like 30 minutes. And the rest of it was just a bunch of awkward forced conversations, cutscenes you didn't care about, characters you didn't care for in the slightest, and it had pretty awfully written dialogue, constant fade-ins and fade-outs, stealth sections for which the game doesn't even have stealth components, so it just forces you literally to follow a certain character around, and then, yeah, again, all those scenes just randomly come to a halt and force you to wait for minutes long before you can move on. You get sent to a library where you have to check out a bunch of different books. Every single time, the game seems to get broken up and force you into just, like, sitting there on your chair not doing anything. And so the main theme for me, as I'm thinking about, you know, how I feel overall about this game, is like it's constantly making me do things I don't actually want to do, which is very much in line with the themes of the main character that it has. Everything about Forspoken feels forced, even in terms of the narrative, you know? Frey herself doesn't want to be in that world. She doesn't want to talk to her cuff, who constantly she argues with in the game. It forces you, for example, very early on in the opening, they try to kind of make you warm up to a character, even though she, you know, swears a lot and, yeah, I don't know, has this somewhat hostile approach to the world around her constantly, but they try to make you relate to her more by showing that she is somebody with a troubled upbringing where she didn't have any parents looking out for her. She grew up sort of on the streets and made a bunch of enemies there, right? She gets put into the courtroom at the opening, you know, the opening scene. And some of those scenes, immediately from the beginning, are just so poorly written. You know, the moment you get sent out of the courtroom because the judge gives you a second chance, Frey runs into this rival gang, who, you know, still she owes, I guess, something to. They end up fighting and literally threaten her at gunpoint. And what she does as a result is she climbs over a fence and then starts taunting them, where she can still very much get shot. It doesn't make any sense. She then goes home, where, you know, she lives with a cat, I guess. Turns out that she has a huge bag of money, you know, a bunch of, I guess, money she ended up stealing in the months prior to it, and has the plans to sort of make a new start in her life, right? But the thing is, she wakes up the day after with the building put on fire. And so, as you wake up in your room and you have your bag of money standing there, you can't actually pick it up. You're literally forced to go out of your room and find your cat first, which doesn't make any sense, because it's like, okay, why would I not immediately bring the money with me, knowing that the whole place is on fire here? You then find your cat, and boom, your room, it's basically too late. You can't get your money back anymore. Nothing about this narrative makes any sense already from the get-go. Everything is forced about it. The relationship, like I said, between then Frey and Cuff, who she meets as soon as she, you know, finds herself in the land of Athia, Forspoken setting, is forced too. They don't want to be together. Well, Cuff doesn't seem to mind it, but she does. It's just, it's a mess. Now, I will cut it some slack and say that watching some of the scenes play out, I did have a mild smile on my face at certain points in time, but it's especially the vocabulary of Frey that I personally can't stand. The constant adjectives that she has to add to every single sentence, calling them gnarly beasts, mangled monsters, you know, all these kinds of things. The game just feels like, I mean, the question I constantly ask myself is, who's this game written for? Who do you think you're actually appealing to? I feel like too many developers nowadays live on social media, and so they start actually believing that what they see over there is real life. Well, I can tell you it's not. You know, out on the streets you don't see many people walking around with purple hair and pronouns on their name badges. But that appears to be the audience that, yeah, that a character like Frey is supposed to appeal to. Well, that's cool and all, but you're definitely not appealing to me in that case, and I feel like you're not appealing to the vast majority of people in the gaming community that way. Maybe I'm wrong, could be the case, we're gonna have to wait and see for what the game will do in terms of sales. It's definitely a question I ask myself therefore too. It's like, okay, am I simply not the audience anymore, right? Is that what it is? Is that what has changed? Am I the one not fully caught up with reality perhaps? But I don't know, I'd like to think that I have a pretty solid case in, you know, what I myself am pointing out here. I even did a poll over on my YouTube community tab, asking people there, you know, which game did you actually end up getting? And Forspoken seems to suffer massively from the review scores that it has gotten. It definitely seemed to have turned off a lot of people from potentially buying it, whereas at first I feel like most people definitely hadn't expected the game to turn out this bland. But again, it's the character, it's the forced nature of a lot of its gameplay. It's also just the open world design that feels so outdated. Like I'm playing a Ubisoft game out of 2010. Here we go again, you know, walking up the same towers, very generic ones, you know, with the same 3 floors, battling a bunch of monsters and then making our way back, finding these monuments to level up our character. The world is massive, absolutely insanely massive. But all the objectives are the same thing. And to finish it all off, in terms of environments, I really wasn't impressed either. It just looks bland. The color palette is kind of minimalistic. The environments just don't look appealing or inviting. Yeah, I won't say that it doesn't have some potentially redeeming factors the more you get into the game. That's still what I myself am waiting to find out about. Because, like I said, I'm still relatively early on playing it. But that's where we get to, obviously, the Dead Space remake, which is a whole different case in and of itself. When I play Dead Space, the first thing that I think about is like, this game actually gets me. This game gets what I want out of a video game. I just want to be put right in the middle of it, get going, and have a fantastic time every single step of the way. That's exactly what Dead Space does. Now, for the record, I never actually played the original Dead Space in 2008. I know that it slipped a little bit under the radar when it released, because it did so, I think, at a very similar time as Mirror's Edge. Both games were published by EA at the time, and I myself was very heavily involved with Mirror's Edge. Absolutely loved that. I, you know, at that particular age, didn't care much at all for horror type of experiences, survival horror or whatever, right? Even nowadays, I feel slightly stressed still playing some of these games, I gotta admit that, but overall I will say I've gotten much more used to it, and I have a fantastic time playing it. I was a little bit surprised how much the Dead Space remake at least feels reminiscent to your average, you know, Resident Evil game nowadays. I know that those are also some of the changes that the developer specifically made to it, where they allowed you, I guess, more to backtrack, right? And they introduced those clearance levels, which apparently weren't even there before. So, you know, I'm gonna try and actually look a little bit more into that and see what the differences gameplay-wise are compared to the original, because I find it interesting what they did there, because like I said, it feels so much like Resident Evil. I booted up the game, and I will say that in the first half hour to an hour, I wasn't even super impressed. Like, of course, it has a great atmosphere. The graphics are fantastic and are definitely a big step up compared to the original when you put them side by side. But, you know, it is a relatively straightforward corridor shooter at first, right? Where the cool thing that they did do is that you actually don't have to, or you shouldn't headshot any of these monsters. You're supposed to cut their limbs off, literally, with your plasma cutter or pistol that you have, which is definitely an interesting gameplay design, but it isn't until a little bit further in that you start to just simply unlock a bunch more weapons. You start upgrading whatever you have. You get a couple of puzzle elements introduced to it, anti-gravity type levels. Variety comes, like, you know, it takes a little bit, I guess, for a lot of variety to be added, but once it's there, that's where it just becomes absolutely great, and you can't stop playing it. You're just eager to get the next upgrade for whatever new gun that you have. Like right now I have one that literally saws up enemies, right? And a flamethrower that you can use to, well, I guess take care of some of the smaller ones that sometimes come crawling at you and can literally end up jumping on your body, and then you have to fend them off. So every weapon also seems kind of more designed for a particular enemy type. So I just think that overall, from a gameplay perspective, again, the polish here is visible. You can't complain at a game like this because of how well it runs, how satisfying the shooting feels, you know, how well it's all structured, and how you keep coming across areas that you've previously already visited before. However, now you have these different clearance levels, right? And so you can enter particular rooms you weren't able to get to before, and so you just constantly end up unlocking extra upgrades, making progress, and so it never stops feeling engaging. I also really like just some of the small additions that they apparently made too, like the power circuits. Those I heard, you know, weren't in the original game, but it basically comes down to giving you a choice. Like, okay, do you want to actually cut the power out and play the next little bit without any lights, which can definitely be a bit of a terrifying experience, especially if you're a pussy like me. But I mean, you will only be able to see the monsters through the flashlight of your gun as you're aiming, which is, again, it's terrifying because they just jump into your face. Or do you play, for example, without oxygen, where you're going to be forced to, well, basically speedrun the section, I guess, trying to find the next oxygen tank to make sure that you refill the oxygen that you have available for you. Yeah, it's just these little things that they add to it, which I feel constantly keep you on your toes. And they add that, again, that interactivity, that engagement that Forspoken is so very much lacking, where that game is just a literal drag and I'm sitting here being bored out of my mind. Dead Space, I'm engaged every minute that I play it, and that's the best thing I can say about it. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of its storytelling, because most of it is done through audio logs and files that you find scattered throughout the environment. You get these live video calls with some of your squad mates in gameplay, so they just sort of catch you up on certain discoveries that they make, and they send you towards new objectives. But all of that is sort of happening, you know, as you're caught up with whatever is happening around you in the environment itself, fighting guys, or maybe, you know, trying to loot. So it's not something that I pay a lot of attention to, I gotta say, because of that. And I feel like overall, story-wise, it's not gonna be a story that will really stick. But that being said, again, from a gameplay perspective, which at the end of the day is the most important thing, I'm having an absolute blast with it. And yeah, what more can I really say? I think that when I look at both of these releases, Dead Space on one hand and then Forspoken on the other, there is one game that just gets me. And the thing is, and I guess the point that I want to leave you all with this video is, like, it's not that complicated, right? Like, I don't understand how game developers nowadays in 2023 still don't really understand what makes an appealing game sometimes. With Forspoken, where the character is not appealing to anyone, the open world is just littered with the same repeated icons of monuments and towers to find across the map. The pacing comes to a total halt so frequently, and it actually just doesn't allow you to even play. Like I said, it's not that complicated, guys. All that people want from a good video game is just to have a fun time, to fuck shit up, to have a story and characters that we actually care for, and to not feel like a product is literally wasting our time as we're playing it. Yeah, I think that's just where I'm going to be leaving you all for today, guys. So I hope you all enjoyed my video, of course. If you did, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because that way you won't be missing out on any of my uploads. Let me know in the comments, did you actually end up getting any one of these two games? Which one? And, you know, how do you feel about it so far, I guess? Yeah, and then with that being said, I want to thank you all a lot for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back next time.